Hey everyone, welcome to Ancient Wisdom, Modern Voices, the podcast where timeless knowledge meets contemporary insight. Each episode, we bridge the gap between the past and present, bringing ancient insights to examine today's most pressing issues. Join us on a journey as we explore how the old can illuminate the new. Hello everyone, and welcome back to episode 2 of the Ancient Wisdom, Modern Voices podcast. We're your host. I'm Tyler.
I'm eating.
This is Michelle.
And I'm Nina.
Hope everyone is doing well wherever you're listening from. Hey, do us a quick favor and give this podcast a 5-star review and subscribe here on Spotify and Apple Music. Your support means the world to us. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about the duty of a citizen. We felt this would be a good topic to talk about given that here in the United States, we have a presidential election coming up on November 5th. And given the historic nature of this election, it really made me stop and reflect for a moment. And I was asking myself this question: what are the duties of a good citizen, and what are our roles in shaping the future of our great nation? During my reflection, I was reminded by this quote from our 35th president, John F. Kennedy. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. So I want to kick off this episode by asking everyone here, what are the duties of a good citizen?
Well, I guess we can look at the actual definition of being a citizen. So, the word citizen actually derived from the word civilis, which means to be courteous. So, fundamentally, being a citizen means to be courteous. And I kind of like that idea, to be courteous to those around you.
Or being a good neighbor, being
yeah.
considerate and taking care of others around you.
Yeah, I feel like people's perception of what it means to be a citizen has evolved over time. And I think also based on each person's individual experiences, they might hold a specific, certain feeling towards that word. I mean, typically nowadays, when we say we're a citizen of a place, it means you're legally recognized as a person that lives in that nation. But I think it's interesting if we think back to the breaking down of the word of citizen, like Nina said, in Latin Greek roots, it derives from the word civilis, which means civil. And when we take civil action, I mean, it kind of makes you think about what does it mean to take civil action? You're taking action, but you're also still kind of in a way being courteous and being honest with what you're doing.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
And I felt like, to me, like, being a citizen can also mean, like, you just being able to contribute in some way to the communities or to the country.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And oftentimes people think that being a citizen is just about voting, which is an important component. I do believe that being a responsible citizen goes beyond that. It's about actively engaging and contributing to our communities. Like really making an effort to improve not only our own lives, but also the lives of others by making sure that our neighborhoods is better for everyone. So, for example, you can participate in cleanup projects in your community to clean up the trash. I know for myself and Nina, we actually participated last year in a forest cleanup project in the town that we live in. And it was organized by our neighbors. And this was actually our first time volunteering for a cleanup project. So we went into this forest that a lot of people, local people, go into to walk. And when we went in there, I remember I was like really, really shocked because there was so much junk. And Nina, you remember that, right? There was like, it was littered all over the forest. Like there was
Yeah, I
beer
do.
cans, tires, old electronics. There was like so much garbage. And I was like really, really shocked. So we went with a group about, I want to say it was like around 20 people, and we spent like a few hours just picking up the trash. And for me, it was a really eye-opening experience because before, and Nina knows this too, I will always constantly dismiss picking up trash, and I would say, "Oh, that's not my job. That's the town's job to handle that and be responsible for that." But after participating in this cleanup project, it really opened my eyes, and I realized that we're members of this community. And as members of this community, as being citizens of this town, we have an active role that we play in improving the quality of life here. So after we were done for the day, I really felt like a big sense of satisfaction knowing that we made the forest cleaner and safer for everyone to enjoy it. And it was a small, but I felt that it was a really meaningful way to contribute as a citizen.
Yeah, I totally agree. I didn't realize how much of an impact this forest cleanup had on you, Tyler, and I'm glad that this experience helped you and helped us be more aware about what a duty of a citizen means. Because I agree, it goes so much more than just the typical when we think about like voting or paying taxes. And to your point on volunteerism, actually, I think there was two takeaways from the forest cleanup. One was the fact that this cleanup was organized by a middle schooler in our neighborhood community, and I think that
All
goes to
right.
show that being a citizen is not just voting or paying taxes, but you can do it at any age, right? Maybe you're not of age to
Mm-hmm.
vote yet, but you can still find meaningful ways to be a good citizen and to contribute to your hometown, such as organizing a forest cleanup. And I think the second point, which I kind of mentioned a bit earlier, is that I think volunteerism is really such a great way for us to get closer to the community
Mm-hmm.
and to be an active participant, because at least for me, the work that I do in my day-to-day job don't necessarily have a direct impact in my community, but
Mm-hmm.
volunteering allows me to have a direct impact, which I think is why volunteering is so meaningful. And I think that is a part of being a duty of a citizen, in addition to the typical what we think of like voting or jury duty.
I think going when you guys mentioned about how it's more than just doing X, Y, and Z, it reminds me of when I was pursuing my graduate studies and in my philosophy class for education, we talked about ancient philosophers like Socrates, Plato, and from that time, like 470 BCE, around that time, they were talking about creating an ideal state. But in order to do that, they have to educate enlightened leaders, kind of like their citizens, to be informed in order to be a leader. But then there are also differences in this perception. Like the sophists, they were people that offered education that were designed to kind of build upon these technical skills that we should have to be able to function in society, to promote success in
I
public
see.
life. Yeah, whereas Socrates and Plato, they kind of saw it differently, where almost like as if that's secondary, more of trying to, they wanted these enlightened leaders of the state to have these virtuous acts or virtuous qualities, and to manifest it, to nurture that.
Got you. I feel like today's society, we focus a lot on the first aspect, like making sure that people are developing the technical skills needed to be able to find a job or be able to provide value to society.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the point that you're making is that that is only one part of the equation of being a citizen, not just being able to
Yeah.
do a certain type of work, but also to be able to have um like human values such as um taking care of others, being kind, being
Yeah,
honest.
so they had a lot of debate about like, oh, who's right or not. But then it made me wonder now, like, is there a middle ground? Like, could it be both? Could you try to nurture both aspects? Like some of the virtues that they cherished were, like, for example, justice and wisdom.
Right.
And so I wonder if there's a middle ground for both sides, both parties, of if enlightened leaders were like citizens that were informed, then can we have citizens that have built character, build that exhibit these virtues, but also teach them to be able to have a job in society?
Right. And I'm sure you're doing that too as a teacher, right? You're teaching students not
Mm-hmm.
just the curriculum, but also these values of sharing,
Exactly.
honesty is the best policy, stuff like that.
Yeah, if we look at education, it is the foundation of the country. It's
Yeah, I mean, if you look back at history, you will notice that whenever there is a political, societal problem, they tend to then turn towards our educational institutions to try to make changes. Like when A Nation at Risk came out that we're falling behind, the result was, all right, let's do standardized testing, let's give advanced placement AP classes, honors classes. Let's give more rigorous science classes so we're not falling behind. I mean, like, for example, when there was the Cold War, that increased the need or the attention towards having more STEM activities and more attention on science.
Yeah, I feel like this focus on education is also something that is even in ancient China. Mencius, for instance, talked a lot about the importance of education. And I think in this education, Mencius is talking about more values that all humans ought to practice, such as filial piety or loyalty.
righteousness.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because do you guys remember taking social studies in elementary school?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and I feel like, and it's okay if you don't. It really depends on your teacher, how they taught it, and on your interest and how engaging it was. But I feel like it's not uncommon for some people to kind of just forget about social studies in class. But really, social studies has multiple components. For example, it has geography. It also includes history, of course, culture, and civics. Okay, and that I feel like social studies is a big part in trying to also introduce what it means to be a citizen. I have a professor back at UVA. He's Dr. E.D. Hirsch, and he argued for a shared knowledge curriculum or core knowledge curriculum to try to improve the American education system. There's so many different curriculums out there, so him and his team decided to create this. Long story short, their purpose is they believe that our children, our next generation, while there are differences in culture, there should be some kind of, he calls it core knowledge, where that everybody should have that basic understanding of, in order to then build upon it later on with their future learning to then become eventually like a productive citizen that can make informed decisions. And for example, for fifth grade, one of the units is about the Mesoamerican ancient civilizations like the Aztecs, Mayas, and the Incas. I didn't learn about that until middle school, but it is true that he considered that as one example of core knowledge where everybody, regardless of background, should probably learn about that at some point in their lives.
Right. I
Yeah,
think it's
going
interesting how you mentioned that social studies is more than just history, but also about learning about citizenship and just the way other cultures work. I've always thought social studies was like history. I never really thought of it more than that. So I really like the point that you brought up there.
yeah, kind of going back to what you were saying about how we all need to be knowledgeable and be informed citizens, because sometimes I feel like it's important that we're educated and informed so that we're not always following orders for the government blindly. Like, because there are times that we need to question some of the policies or the laws that have been passed down.
Yeah, and I feel like that also applies to like whenever you're in some kind of situation where there is a particular person that has more authority than you at that moment, is that we do need to have, like, yes, we might trust this person, but then we also need to have, like Eating said, have that ability to think about, is that right? And I feel like we should be able to voice our thoughts and opinions in a civil manner. And then if we disagree, that's fine. But as it's important, kind of like what we said in our last episode, it's trying to understand what the other person or party is trying to say.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, those are great points, and this actually leads into my next question. So we live in an era right now where national crises, whether they're political, social, environmental, they seem to be emerging at an increasing pace. And we're seeing more of this on the news: natural disasters, economic instability, human rights issues, civil unrest. So, in these uncertain times, citizens are often called upon to play a more active role. Now, the big question becomes, what should that role be? Do we as citizens bear a deeper responsibility to get involved and to contribute to the solutions that our country desperately needs? So, my next question to everyone is, what are the duties of a citizen when confronted with issues and challenges in society?
All right. I kind of have a scenario that I want to share with everyone. Again, in my graduate studies, there was an American psychologist learned about, and maybe you guys heard of him before. His name is Lawrence Kohlberg.
I don't
No,
think I've heard
I
of
don't
this.
That's all right. So a lot of his studies he came up with theories of moral development and character development, cognitive development, very big on development. So he would ask people these, we call it Kohlberg's moral dilemmas. So I'm going to give an example, and I've asked multiple people, and based on your answers, it kind of helps us learn more about like your values, like what are the influences in your life that helped you kind of get to this answer, because it kind of leads back to what we've been talking about, like, oh, we need to have our own understanding, be informed, manifest virtues or nurture virtues that we have, and then utilize them however we can in society. But this is just a way to kind of get people thinking about their own values or views. So I'm just going to say it, and then we can kind of take turns to kind of share out how you would respond to this. How's that?
Ooh, that sounds
Yeah,
Let's go for it.
All right. So there's this person named Hines. Okay. His wife was dying from a particular type of cancer. Doctor said a new drug might help her, like save her. The drug had been discovered by a local chemist, and Hines tried desperately to buy some, but the chemist was charging 10 times the money it should cost to make the drug, and it was much more than what Hines could afford. Hines could only raise half the money, even after asking for help from his friends and family. That's all the money he could get, was half. He explained to the chemist that his wife was dying and asked if he could have the drug cheaper or pay the rest at a later time. But unfortunately, the chemist refused, saying that he had discovered the drug and was going to make money from it. And the husband was so desperate to save his life, he later broke into the chemist's lab and stole the drug. So you could take a moment to think about it, because it is a lot. I personally don't necessarily think there's like a right or wrong answer. It's more important of people's reasoning for their responses. So the question is, should Hines have broken into the laboratory to steal the drug for his wife, and why?
Are these hypothetical scenarios?
They are hypothetical, yeah. But I feel like it could definitely happen. While you guys are thinking, when I did an assignment for this, I had to ask two individuals that were in their early 20s, so young adults. And they gave me two different answers. I'm not going to tell you yet. I don't want to change your opinion. But so there are many factors that could contribute to a person's response. It could be, again, their background, their culture, their own experiences growing up, their religion or belief system. But yeah, should he have
I feel like
broken into
I
it?
would approach it from the way of how my wife would react if I did such a thing. If my wife feels like you shouldn't have done this, even if it means. Well, we also don't know for sure if like this is gonna cure the cancer, right? There's no guarantee. So that's already a gray area.
I think I can understand why he did it, even though it's something that he shouldn't do. It came from good intentions. So,
Yeah.
but at the end of the day, stealing in itself, the act itself, is not right. That's what I think. But I can understand why he did it. So, like this, I felt like he's just this is a very complex situation. because he did it with good intentions. He wanted to save his wife. It wasn't for himself. It was for his wife. It's just that the act itself, is not right. And to me, I wouldn't think that it makes him a bad human being because of that act, because he did it with good intentions. Then again, like, it's just I would think of it as the act itself is not right. Yeah.
Okay.
For me, the stealing part, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't support that, but I can sympathize with his situation given that it is a very difficult situation that he's been placed in. Now, if that chemist, if he was more generous, because think about it, the chemist wanted to make more money, right? Hence, chemist didn't want to cut the price of the drug, right? It's similar to any real life scenario. There was a case, I think it was Martin Shkreli. He increased the price of this particular drug. It was like 1,000% increase. It was a really astronomical increase of the price of the drug. And then there was a huge public outcry of it because it was a very essential drug to treat some kind of disease. So there was a huge public backlash to it. And it really raised the question about a lot of times, like a lot of these pharmaceutical companies, they have all these drugs could save people's lives, but yet they're charging so expensive that the average American can't even afford it. And hence you hear people, they try to get drugs on the counter or they resort to other means of getting the medication. And there's a huge ripple effect from their actions, right? So I felt like it really ties into this. So it had the chemists not charge such an exorbitant price, then the husband wouldn't have to resort to stealing the drug for his wife. And this whole thing all would have been prevented had the person that had the cure been more generous, had more
Right.
giving heart. In fact, if the chemist was a good citizen that really cared for his or her fellow citizen,
True.
he would say, hey, this is a fellow citizen that has a really difficult situation. His wife needs help and this drug can save her. But think about it. So if this drug can save this husband's wife, it could save other citizens, other people's spouses as well too. So I felt that had the chemist been a good citizen and really looked out and cared for other people instead of their self-interest, all of that would have been prevented.
Yeah,
That's
I think
true.
This is a
Yeah,
very
that is
tricky
true.
situation, though. Like, this is an issue that is not just in this example, but in the pharma industry in general. Just because it's so expensive to make drugs, and the reason why they're charged at such a high rate because they're trying to recoup all the losses that they've made from like the past 20 years when they were trying to develop this drug.
Exactly.
So I think it is understandable from a business perspective why they're
Right.
doing it, but I also do agree that it doesn't seem ethical. But also at the same time, if they're not getting the money back, there is literally no incentive for there's going to be very little incentive for them to like develop these drugs because they are inherently very costly to make, and if they're unable to recoup their losses, they're not going to be motivated to make it, right? Like they want to be able to make some sort of profit from it. But it is definitely a very tricky situation indeed.
Yeah, so
If I was the person with the wife, I would like do like a loan, take the medicine for now, we pay the rest later or something if the chemist absolutely refused to give it.
yeah. I mean, again,
Yeah.
there's no right or wrong. I feel like it's just a hypothetical scenario, but it could be relatable to some people. But it's just interesting to hear people's reasoning. I mean, one of the young adults I interviewed, his response, he's a 25-year-old who was Taiwanese, but all grew up in a different country as well. He said he wouldn't say it's a clear cut no, he shouldn't have stolen it because he understood that it was overcharged. But then he also thought that that should have probably been his last resort. Like, why didn't he go take a loan from the bank or something? Because he went to ask, he was just thinking he went to ask his friends and family for the money, but why didn't he go take a loan or something? And I was just like, yeah, that's true. Like, it's just all something to consider. Or like trying to find fault in the doctor, like using the law to try to address this. But yeah, he didn't think of it as like a clear cut no. Whereas the next person I interviewed, which is actually one of my fiance's friends, he's a 24-year-old Filipino American who was born in the Philippines, but then moved to the US when he was young. And he said that a big part of why he said why he said for what he said to this response is he had to be the man of the house at an early age for the family. And so for him, he was just like, he should have absolutely not have resorted to stealing the drug, because you got to think about, I think it was Nina, where you think about the wife's perspective. Like, if she discovered that Hines, her husband, saved her, but then has to go to jail as a response, like, that's not going to probably help her in the healing process.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then how long would you need to rely on the drug to be able to be completely healed? So then thinking further into the future, like, he would have to pay jail time, and then his wife would have to recover alone as a response. Makes it more difficult. Yeah. So for him, he was more considerate, or trying to think more about like the wife's perspective as well.
Yeah, but something I want to add to what Tyler was saying earlier is that we're all in this society or in this world, everybody is connected in some way. What we do not only affect ourselves, or the decisions that we make not only affect ourselves, but it can also affect others. And it may not always be very transparent. Just like when you were saying, if the chemist if he was able to charge at a reasonable price, then these problems would have been prevented.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like trying to be a citizen, or a good citizen, there are challenges nowadays in trying to do so. And it seems a lot of it revolves around money.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there are a lot of gray areas.
At least from what we're talking about, it's kind of going back to our own people's own interests, benefits, instead of thinking of the greater good sometimes.
Yeah. But it is also a challenge that, like, it does make it difficult that we are in a society that focus a lot on money. And that is why, like,
Materials.
nonprofits struggle a lot with fundraising, because
Mm,
people don't
Yeah.
necessarily have the incentive to invest out, besides from like their own goodwill, versus like if you invest in like a company that's going to make a lot of money in the future, it seems like a more worthwhile investment, even though you can say that like the value added to humankind isn't going to be as great as like a nonprofit, for instance.
Yeah, I think that it also, as a nation, we want to see almost instant results. Like, if we put something in place, we want to see that whatever we're addressing, we see improvement immediately or almost immediately. And if we don't, then we're going to change to something else that we think will work.
Right.
That is
I don't know if you guys feel like that happens. I mean, I definitely see that in the education system, especially with curriculums. If we don't see results in like 4 or 5 years, like, I'm already on my 3rd reading curriculum, and I've been teaching for like 7 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Dang, they
That's
switch
crazy.
quickly. Yeah, that's the same in like the climate tech sector. I know that in the early 2000s there was a lot of investment put in it, but then because the return on investment for like huge infrastructure energy projects takes so long, it was very difficult for these projects to get off the ground.
Right.
Even though they were going to be a net benefit to society, but because it was just going to be too long of an investment, investors want to.
Well, that's unfortunate.
It was very
Time is
unfortunate.
money.
But I think the tide is turning. I think now it's a lot better than what it was back in the early 2000s. So there is hope
That's
for the
good.
future.
Yeah.
But it is a challenge for sure.
Yeah, I think based on what we're talking about, it just reminds me, being a citizen, it begins in your daily life, like your interactions with other people. It's not just, I mean, that's a part of it. Being a good citizen is like doing fundraisers, voting, but then it's also, your interactions, what you do on a daily basis with others.
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
It's also the choices that we make too. A lot of these.
Oh, 100%, yeah.
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 And then I think even the work that we do, in our own careers can contribute a lot to the society. Like, are we fulfilling our duties or responsibilities of this job that we have right now?
Right.
That's true. And it's like eating what Mensch just said about like fulfilling your duty. We have multiple duties. We fulfill multiple roles. Like if you're at home or daughter or son,
Yeah.
sibling at home, right? And then when you're at your workplace, we're our whatever we are for our work. We have multiple roles. But Tyler, didn't you tell me about some author that you read about recently? Something about habits to be a good citizen?
Yeah, there's an author. His name is Dr. Richard Haas. He's a veteran diplomat. He was the president emeritus of the Council of Foreign Relations. And he actually recently released a book called The Bill of Obligations, The 10 Habits of Good Citizens.
Oh, yeah, that's what it is. That's what you were telling me.
Yeah, that's the book. And he basically was sharing these 10 habits that he believes are essential for good citizenships. And essentially, those 10 are to be informed, is to get involved, stay open to compromise, remain civil, reject violence, value norms, promote the common good, respect government service, support the teaching of civics,
Mm-hmm.
and putting the country first.
Yes.
And I feel, and when I read that, I was like, this is something that should definitely be taught in
Yeah.
schools, like in the
Yeah.
schools
I
across
agree.
across the country. Because I remember growing up, like in social study history class, they never really taught us on what it means to be a good citizen. They just say, okay, this is the American government. This is House of Representative, the Senate.
Yeah.
This is how the judicial branch works, the executive branch work. So they tell you how the government works, but they never really tell us how we can be good citizens of this nation. It was kind of more like general basic things of how our government works, but never really instill in us what are
Yeah.
these habits or these traits that a good citizen should have.
That's true, because oftentimes, I mean, less now, because I feel like in recent years, we've definitely put more attention into social studies. At least in my county, we revamped the social studies curriculum. But before we revamped it, a lot of times there were students that when we talk about social studies, they only think it's about the American history or they think it's just voting, like the presidential election. And I'm like, no, it's
Right.
more than that. It's also how you are as a person.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's fair, because when I think of this, I also just think of voting. But even then, I think the age group that are least likely to vote is actually like the youngest age group.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly, what we're learning doesn't translate super well into action.
Well,
That is
I guess,
true,
right. Well, I guess I need to add that book to my Goodreads list because I still need to meet my reading goal for the year.
Yeah, like just going back to what Tyler was saying, like I don't really remember anything about these 10 habits. I don't even think like not one was
But then I also feel like they changed the terms too, or the way they're like trying to promote these values. I feel like it also changes like how they word it.
it could be. But I know that most of the time I just remember learning like the wars and when they happened and who was involved. But I don't think we ever learn how to be a good citizenship and not repeat history. Repeat the past mistakes that we've made. But
Yeah,
I
you want to
really
go
like your
back in
point.
time and then you can be in my class.
Yeah, that'll be great. I want to be in your class, Miss Wu.
Yeah, I think eating when you mentioned how like we remember a lot of facts, but we don't really think about like the other parts beyond the facts. And I think that's so true. I'm currently taking a course on like human science foundations for environmental managers, and it's like my first true humanities class, and I I struggle a lot with like I just want to know facts. But the reality of this class is like understanding how environmental policy has evolved to where it is today and what we can do to improve upon it. And I think this is like
Mhm.
super valuable. But it's like not the skill sets that we typically learn growing up. We focus so much on like memorization or hard facts, but less so on understanding how do things evolve the way it is and what can we do to change that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think they should start incorporating these in their curriculums.
But I think it's also like at the end of the day, like learning about it, but then also putting into action is, and giving them the opportunity to put it into action,
Yeah.
showing them how they could do that. And it could start locally. Like, for example, I think it was 2 years ago with my fifth graders, we were learning about the Bill of Rights. And so we put a lot of attention or time into knowing what the First Amendment is, which are the 5 freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of press, freedom to assemble. I'm missing the last one, but the 5 freedoms, because most of the time people just think of freedom of speech. Oh, and freedom to petition. I think that was the one I forgot. And it started in our school. So really quick, this example is typically if it rained in the morning and then, back in the day in elementary school, you had recess. So if it rained, then obviously the field is very moist, very wet. You can't really play. Safety concerns. So what they did was they said, okay, blacktop only for recess. But a lot of our fifth graders were not happy with that. So what they did is they made a petition and they gave it to our principal and said that instead of blacktop only, we'd rather have indoor recess. Because blacktop only is also, they said because it's also unsafe. There are a bunch of students that are just crowded in that one area. You can't really do much, and people are falling or getting scraped. So they said they would rather have indoor recess. And so because of their petition, because they had representatives to speak to our principal about this matter, our principal actually did, from that point on, instead of doing blacktop only for those situations where the field is very not okay, we would just do indoor recess. And that was a good example of them utilizing their First Amendment in a peaceful way locally in their school.
Wow, I love that example, Michelle. That's actually pretty impressive for fifth graders. I just love how instead of just accepting the situation, that they actually took action and made a case for what they wanted. Now, this is a perfect example of how even at a young age, people can engage with their community and make real change. I love it. So this actually got me thinking, beyond these smaller acts of civic engagement, there's a deeper question about our role as citizens. It's not just about voicing concerns or improving our immediate surroundings, but it's really about the moral responsibilities that we hold as members of society. So my question that I want to pose to everyone is, what are the moral obligations of citizens toward their country?
Well, maybe we can take a look at history and see what other philosophers have said in the past about this.
For sure, I know that Plato in the Republic, he emphasizes that citizens have a duty to contribute to the well-being of the state by fulfilling roles that align with their unique abilities and talents. And that's a very crucial point to remember because everyone here has a part to play in society because we all bring different kinds of skills to the table. Just think about it. You need teachers to educate the future generations. You need the healthcare workers to keep us healthy. You need the police and firefighters to keep us safe, and so on and so forth. Every profession and skill set contributes to the fabric of a nation. And without each of these roles, a nation wouldn't be able to function effectively. So when we all recognize the value of our individual roles and think just beyond our own self interest, we all can work together towards the greater good and help build a stronger nation. We all have something valuable to offer. So why not use those talents to contribute to a better future for the country as a whole?
Yeah, and then further into the Republic, it kind of makes you think about like, okay, so then if we want to be able to utilize one another's abilities and talents in various settings to contribute to the well-being of our society, basically, it's you got to also recognize your own talents and abilities, and then how can you use that? I mean, a lot of times, again, school is a great place for you to figure that out, unearth your talents, to build those abilities. But I think it can happen in anywhere. Like I learned more about myself at work too, and then over time, it became more clear where my talents, or I wouldn't say talents, like strengths are.
I feel
Or
like
doing volunteer.
yeah.
But what are you gonna say?
Oh, I was gonna say I like how Plato says that everyone has a role to play and that every role is important, regardless of which role it is. I feel like sometimes we, as a society, tend to favor certain types of roles over other roles, or think that some people have more responsibility than others and therefore more important. But the reality is that everyone is playing an important role. Everyone's work is valuable to society. The second part that this made me thought was that I think our generation, at least as a Gen Z, struggles a lot with figuring out what our talents and abilities are. We always get like existential crisis, as in like, what should I be doing with my life? And it's something that a lot of us struggle with.
I'm not Gen Z, I'm millennial.
Yeah.
But it's more than just, Gen.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, I feel like I went through that when I was trying to decide what to put as my major for college.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember I would start thinking about what I want to do in middle school. And then I made the decision by high school, and then just clearly knew by college that this is the career that I'm going to go for.
Yeah, and I feel like, kind of going back to my example with my students, is like, as their role as students, even if they can't vote for the president until they're 18, there are other parts of their duty or other parts of being a citizen that they can exercise at a young age, or start to learn. Like, for example, I don't know if you guys had it in middle school or high school where there was SGA. Like, they could run for president, vice president, treasurer, secretary. Yeah. I mean, you got exactly. It's like, why do we have that? It's trying to kind of give them the opportunity to kind of see what it would be like in the government or like in society. Well, when they enter society. Yeah, because I feel like as a citizen, you could have a leadership role, or you might have one where it's a leadership role that could be on a state level or a local level or among your organization or in just a group in an organization. You know what I mean? So it's trying to figure out your role and then the responsibilities that you could do to showcase your strengths, like to use that.
Actually, I just wanted to jump off on your point. There's something that Mensch said is when you mentioned, Michelle, that you take on a leadership position. And when you're in the leadership position, right, Mensch mentioned that those who are in position to make social changes, and they're also responsible for providing the environment necessary for moral development, is not only responsible for their own character, but also responsible for the character formation of others, right? So it's not like we take on these leadership roles, and your role in that position is actually very, very important because you're also creating that environment that's actually necessary for forming the characters of other people, right? So that's what we say when we have like virtuous and benevolent people in government, they're going to create an environment that cultivate those kind of characteristics and characters and traits amongst their peers, right? Whereas if you have people who are in position of power, but they don't have those good traits or good characteristics, it's going to create a bad influence in that group. And that also affects the moral development of people in that group. And that environment that they create also trickles down to everyone beneath.
That is very true. I was learning of a case study where there was accounting fraud that happened in a particular company where they basically moved the actual date of when like certain sales were made so that their quarter revenues are higher than what they are. And a lot of this was, I think, as a direct result of the culture in the company. They were very sales focused, and so people were trying to hit certain targets and were basically cultivated to essentially like work really hard to like get these sales to boost the revenue of the company. But the way that the bonus structure was designed in the company and other issues kind of led to this accounting fraud being happen, and also led to people feeling that like, oh, it's okay to make these moral missteps, right? Because it was really directly based off how the company structured their incentives. So
Mm.
I do agree that it's really important to be careful of to show what we value as leaders in a group, because you could certainly influence the culture of a group very easily.
Now that we reached the end of this episode, why don't we all share with everyone what's all our takeaways?
I mean, I think for sure what it means to be a citizen is actually more profound and deeper than I feel like by definition what it is. Like the definition, if we look online, it would be it's probably a long way of saying it, but it's like you are legally a resident or recognized individual of a nation. But I feel like it's
Right.
more to that. There's more weight to that to uncover like your duties, how you can show that in multiple settings where you are in your daily life.
Yeah, I feel like it could be just as simple as loving and caring for your family and friends. And then once you're able to do that, you can extend it to people in your communities.
That's true. I mean, I don't know if you guys had it. To graduate high school, we had SSL hours, which were student service learning hours. They were like community hours where you're volunteering somewhere.
No, we didn't have that in my high school.
Hours. Yeah, it was a requirement for us. We needed 72 hours to graduate high school. And so why I bring that up is those opportunities kind of introduce the students that are eventually going to be working adults to be more involved in different ways. So I feel like we also need to think about how we can contribute, and it doesn't have to be so grand. Like you don't have to go run for president unless you really want to, but it's like we can contribute in multiple ways. What it means to be a leader is also different based on where you are or like the setting you're in.
Y'all should volunteer more. I second that.
Definitely. My takeaway is going back to our first episode. It's that I feel the best way that everyone can be a good citizen is first, the goal comes from ourselves first and our 5 relationships, right? I feel that if we strengthen our relationships, our personal relationships, the 5 relationships that we mentioned in the previous episode, and if you start off from there, that's a good step. That's a good stepping ground, because when you go to work or you take on a leadership position, people, they see you not just for how you lead, but they also want to know, how does this individual treat their parents? How do they treat their siblings? How do they treat their friends? They're watching you not just on how you do your role, but also seeing like, how are you in your own relationships with people around you, right? I feel like becoming a good citizen is first, it starts from within ourselves, in our own family, and we strengthen our 5 relationships. And then when you go in position of leadership, position of power, then you can create that good environment, and from there you can go and really have more positive influence in your environment.
I like that, having that positive influence around you.
Yeah, I feel like just so that, as long as we continue to develop our character, we continue to willing to learn, grow, learn from others, then then we will at the same time impact whoever you interact with or in any situation in some way. Yeah, just piggyback on what Tyler is saying. It's more focusing more of those inner values that you already have and developing them and bringing out those values and making an impact on those people around you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Because I
and
think
also,
everyone in this society is valuable. I'm sure they can
Right.
contribute in
Absolutely.
some way.
Mm-hmm.
I guess also piggybacking what everyone else had said, I think my takeaway is really about decision making. I love the example that you brought up, Michelle, about the hypothetical situation, and I think
Oh yeah.
a lot of the decisions that we make is actually coming from our inner values, right? And
Absolutely. Yeah.
ensuring that we make a lot of decisions in our daily life. And
Oh yes.
think about, is this decision, is this a reflection of my inner values or not? And I think that is
Mm-hmm.
also one step closer of fulfilling a duty.
Yeah.
Of
Staying
being-
true to yourself despite
Right.
different challenges, huh?
I think I like what you
Exactly.
said, Nina, like reflection. Reflection, introspection, like thinking about your actions and the words. Are they aligned with the values that you have? Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. And thank you to our listeners that tuned in today to this episode. We hope you all got a lot of great value and takeaways from today's conversation. Please remember to subscribe to this podcast on Spotify and Apple Music. And we're also on social media too. Follow us on Instagram at ancientwisdom_modern voices. Tune in next time for episode 3. So until then, we'll see you all the next episode.
Have a lovely
you
rest of your
later.
day.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.